Just start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. It's my first YouTube video. I don't know what I'm doing. It's a terrible face. Hello YouTube. Please be gentle. I've never done a YouTube video before. Don't crucify me if I make this look ridiculous. This is like the first episode we're doing. I'm really excited about it because we're going back to Costa Rica, which is one of my absolute favorite countries in the world. I've been to 80 countries on all 7 continents, and I waited to go to Costa Rica until I was like, well, until last year actually. I went for the first time and it just blew me away. And so in the last year and a half, I've been back 3 times because I love it so much. And the main reason that I love Costa Rica so much is because it is home to, first of all, the Pipa's calling.
How many animals do we have, Mickey?
We've got a lot of animals, and so they frequently make a lot of noise and irritating things throughout my life. But the Pipa is a Suriname toad from, it's the flat one that has the creepy babies out of its back. It's really gross. And they don't have a, God, what's the technical word? They don't have a froggy inflaty sack, frog neck balloon. So instead what they do is they make these clicks and stuff. Anyways, he was just calling. Sorry, I'm getting off topic here. I love Costa Rica so much because it's home to 2 things that if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know I'm completely obsessed with. The first is Monsteras. Monsteras are the coolest. Everyone knows Monstera deliciosa, the big leaf with the holes in it. Monsteras, yeah. Costa Rica and Panama are home to 60% of the global diversity of monsteras. And so when you go to Costa Rica, you walk around in the forest, you will see so many different species. The very first time I went there, I went to La Selva, and I think I saw like 6 endemic species that occur nowhere else that just blew me away, like Monstera costarricensis, which has these rippled petioles, and I can post photos of these. Monstera tenui, which is the largest in the genus, Monstera gracilis. I mean, just so many cool things, it blew me away. But we're not going to be talking about Monsteras today. Today we're going to be talking about my other absolute favorite type of plant, which is Pendent Anthuriums. And for those people who don't know, Pendent Anthuriums refer to Anthurium species that have their central growing point always pointing down. So it doesn't matter how you pot them, if you pot them upright or whatever, they will always find a way to kind of snake their way out of the pot and hang upside down. And the most famously known pendant anthuriums are things like Anthurium vitterifolium, Anthurium pallidiflorum, and also Anthurium wendlingeri. Anthurium wendlingeri is the one that has the curly inflorescence, the inflorescence being the flower of the plant. Aroids, everyone knows what makes an aroid different from all other plants is the fact that it has a spathe and a spadix, right? The spathe is the bit that covers the inflorescence, and the spadix is the part with the receptive flowering bits. And with wendlingeri, that receptive part is twisty, so it looks like a pigtail. It's absolutely bizarre. It's totally weird. Don't ask me in the comments why it does it. I have no idea. All I know is that I just love the aesthetic of this plant. I love the way they look. And so for the last few years, I've been collecting as many clones as I possibly can. And part of the reason that I'm so obsessed with this plant, it's so unique in that it has such geographic variation. So if you kind of know generally anything about biogeography, you'll know that plants and animals tend to change in shape and size and color depending on what kind of habitat they happen to be in, right? It's just a different survival strategy. It's like it's evolution. Ooh. But when certain plants do it, even if it's a tiny area that they live in, they will change enormously. The example I like to use, of course, is Monstera obliqua, which has a range that stretches across basically all of Central and South America, all of Amazonia, and into Panama. And that species looks completely different from country to country. Even within the same country, you can have some plants that have lots of holes and some plants that have no holes at all, and some plants that have big leaves and little leaves. I mean, but the inflorescences are all the same, and so that's why it's so interesting. Wendlingeri is kind of the same, right? Wendlingeri has an even smaller range. Wendlingeri only occurs from parts of Nicaragua into Costa Rica, and mostly along the Caribbean slope of Costa Rica, and then into Panama, where the most diversity is. You know, they occur throughout all of Panama. But that's it, just pretty much those three countries. When lingeri stops at Colombia, and it doesn't occur north of Nicaragua. I mean, it's a really bizarre plant. But in that tiny little area, they look completely different from one another. And so, in anticipation of our upcoming Costa Rica trip, I wanted to take some time to kind of show you guys what a few of my different Lingeri clones look like, just to kind of drive home the point that these things are crazy and that they're super cool and super distinct, and you know, they're really, really unique and special. One of the things that I regret doing was earlier this year, we went to Panama in March, and we traveled 1,200 kilometers across all of Western Panama looking for these plants. I mean, it was like 8-hour day trips in the car.
Why is it so windy?
I was driving Caroline crazy. But anyways, we went to a handful of different sites looking for, you know, famous clones of one lingeri. We went to the state of Veraguas. We went looking for the fat necktie clone. But we weren't doing a lot of filming. I was doing a lot of like crazy plant hunting, you know, because once I get in the zone, I'm like, ah. But, you know, we went out there and we found the fat necktie. And the cool thing about Panama is that, like, the way the clones change is as you go further west or further east, they change in length and in width, right? So when you start in the center of Panama at Panama City, and you start going towards the west, you hit places like the Valle de Anton, the Anton Valley, and that's where you find clones like this one lingeri. Please don't break the leaves. Anyways, oh jeez, he's tripping on me. Anyways, this guy comes from the Valle de Anton. This is this clone that's really common in the west coast, you know, of the U.S., like in California. Pretty much every orchid collector over there has this plant, because back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of orchid people went down to Panama. They drove an hour and a half outside of the city to this site where there's a lot of orchids, and they said, "Oh, cool! Look at this lingeri plant. Let's take them all back to California." And so, you know, these ones grow really quickly. This particular clone seeds really readily. You know, as you can see, I've got an inflorescence right here. It started to curl. But what's interesting about this plant is that the leaves, they don't get very long, you know? For a one lingeri, whose leaves sometimes get 6 to 7 feet long, this thing's only got leaves that max out at like a foot, maybe a foot and a half. And they also clump a lot more, you know? So they create a lot more different heads, and they kind of like whoop, 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 set off little offsets like that. And so this is probably the most common clone in the whole US, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for me because it doesn't get very long. It's kind of like a little bit pendant, but it does, you know, make a lot of inflorescences, and it holds a lot of leaves. If you go to the Conservatory of Flowers in San Francisco, they've got a really humongous one of these there, and a lot of different nurseries in California will have that exact clone. Now, if you want to take that clone and you want to compare it to this one lingeri clone, you can see that they are almost nothing alike. I mean, look at the size of those leaves, man. That's crazy. That's like 2-foot leaves. I feel like a fisherman. I'm exaggerating now. I'm like, yeah, it's 14-foot leaves. But this plant is another famous California clone. This was a cross that was done by Jay Vanini from Exotica Esoterica. And if you ever want to find more good information about one lingeri, I highly recommend you go to his site and read up. This is a cross that he made from 2 different one lingeri clones. One that came from one that came from southeastern Costa Rica in the city of Sixaola, and the other one came from northwestern Panama, another site around northwestern Panama. And so he had those 2 clones in his collection. He crossed them and he created this awesome looking plant. I mean, really phenomenal clone. Really fantastic cross, and this has a really nice inflorescence too. But those 2 are the most common that you get in cultivation, you know, in the U.S. But just to show you kind of how different, you know, they look, you know, here's one that I recently got from Japan, and you can see a Japanese collector. There's no collection data on it, unfortunately, but you can see just how crazy these leaves are. Look at them. This is another trait that a lot of one lingeri will have across Costa Rica. They'll have these phenomenal kind of bullate leaves, is the term, you know, where they get kind of corrugated and they look like cardboard. And there's really there's no explanation for why they do this, but the clones that get really exceptionally long leaves will kind of form this beautiful kind of bullate pattern. The clone that has the most bullate leaves that I've seen actually came from Marie Selby Botanical Garden in Sarasota. That plant had leaves that were like really ridiculous. I mean, they look like they look like Justin Timberlake's hair. You know what I'm talking about? Like the ramen hair. That's what they look like.
I'm not giving you any validation.
Anyways, here's the first one lingua that I ever got. It came from a private collector in California. No collection data on it, but it's got the longest leaves of any one lingua that I own, and they're smooth, which is really, really weird. You know, so just like, that's just to give you kind of an idea about the fact that these things, like, you know, they look totally different from clone to clone, from person to person, from, you know, place to place. There's no two clones that look exactly the same. And the other kind of weird thing is the fact that it's not just reflected in the leaves, it's also reflected in the inflorescence. So look at what the inflorescence looks like from the central Panamanian clone. Very twisty. It'll get more twisty than that. This is still a new flower. And then let's compare that to the flower from this clone that has no collection data on it. It's just like an ugly little nub, you know? It doesn't look like anything. It's not even twisty. And there's other clones like that. There's a clone in Australia that belongs to a collector over there in Cairns, and he has an inflorescence. He has a one lingeri clone where the inflorescence is straight. It doesn't twist at all. And I've been told by some collectors that the rate of twistiness, I guess, if that's the scientific term, the rate of twistiness is dependent on culture, you know, so how you're growing the plant, and what conditions you have it in, and what kind of soil you have it in, with how much water you have it, you know, all those things affect how the flower and how the leaves look. Now, I don't really buy that, but I mean, there might be some truth to it. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but anyways, that's kind of like, yeah, it's interesting to see. But I mean, I think that, you know, the location where they originally come from, that's the thing that really affects their culture. That's what affects their shape the most, is because that's like where they evolved to come from. And it's bizarre because the sites that they come from are like minuscule. The distance is like nothing. I mean, when we drove the 1,200 kilometer trip, it was because we were going in like a big, ridiculous like circle in the Trans-American Highway. But you know, the sites themselves are only, what would you say, a couple 100 kilometers apart?
Yeah, they weren't that far.
That's not that far. That's like nothing, you know? And like, it's all continuous forest. It's all the same forest. So why would they change so much? I mean, just like the presence of rivers and mountains and whatever, but it just creates huge amounts of variation. And I, for one, am obsessed with that. I think it's super awesome. I had one more plant to show you guys that you think you would like. So a lot of people know that philodendrons, monstera, anthuriums, they're all separated by the genus, right? They're the different genera, but then they also are separated by different sections within the genus. So for anthuriums, you have different sections, you know, like the bird's nest type that everyone talks about, that's called section Pachyneurium. And those are the ones that are really, really hardy, and they can live in full sun. You can't kill them, you know. Species like Anthurium superbum and cubensi and Bonplantii, those are the ones with the upright kind of bird nest shape. Pachyneurium, that's a famous one. Now, the section that one lingeri belongs to is, I can never pronounce it right, and there's going to be some botanist out there who's going to comment and be like, God, you're an idiot. But the section is Peripherychitonium. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, sounds right.
Kryptonite. Mm-hmm.
That's a pro tip for all of you people out there, is that if you ever want to sound right in science, just say it really confidently. Doesn't matter if you're dead wrong. Just,
yeah, yell it.
Yeah. Section Peripherychitonium has some of the best plants. It's got one lingeri, it's got Pallidiflorum, but then the other one that everyone always talks about is Anthurium pendens. And if you've ever bought a plant from Ecuador, from Ecuagenera or Equiflora, they always tag the pendant hanging species as Anthurium pendens. Not true. The true Anthurium pendens is really hard to find, and part of the reason is because it's micro-endemic. It's only in Panama. It doesn't even go to Costa Rica. It's only in Panama, and it's only in like certain parts of Panama, like far western Panama. And it's really, really pretty. And I have one right here to show you. I'm gonna end up ripping all the leaves off my plants by doing this video.
I'm gonna cry.
I'm gonna cry too. Anyways, ta-da! Oh yeah, look at that. Isn't that nice? So you can see the leaves are also just like super pendant like one lingeri. And it's also got I don't know what the scientific term is for this. I think someone called it persistent caterpillars, but I call it the fuzzy stem fuzzies. As you can see, the Windlingerii, they all have the stem fuzzies, you know, fuzzies. And that's, I guess, a trait of Windlingerii. So. But the cool thing about pendants is it's like instantly recognizable from Windlingerii. Well, not just because of the leaves, but also because of the inflorescence. One, it isn't curly, but two, it's like really stumpy and weird. I'll put a photo in it so you can see, but you know, I've had this thing flower twice on me and I've almost missed the inflorescence twice. The inflorescence is just this little tiny thing. It's probably about an inch long and it just kind of like pops out right by like the emergent growth point, and then you don't even see it. And then it's not even like a cool color. It's just kind of like brown. It's just kind of brown, and the spathe just kind of like twirls away, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's cool, I guess. And then it just disappears. But anyways, that's what that looks like, in case you're wondering what the true Anthurium pendens looks like. And anyways, that's my collection. I mean, this is only part of the Windlingerii that I have. I have a bunch of other ones that are smaller and not as cool looking. But Windlingerii is just a really, really awesome species. It's probably my absolute favorite ever, anywhere, of all Anthuriums. That's just a quick little lesson on the history of Windlingerii. Or I guess I didn't really get into the history of Windlingerii. It was first collected in Turrialba in Costa Rica by a Brazilian collector. Her name was Anthurium.
You can memorize 5,000 Latin names for plants, but you can't remember one person's name.
Barroso. And I'm sure she has a first name too.
Is that really all it said was Barroso?
Yeah, Barroso. It's the namesake of like Philodendron barrosoanum.
Oh.
Yeah, Barroso. Do some research on Barroso. Anyways, history of Windlingerii. Really, really in depth. A lot of context. Glad you guys really understand it. This has definitely not been just a let me show you my plants video. You guys just stay tuned. We're going to Costa Rica next week. We're going to be traveling all over the country again, checking out a bunch of really cool sites, and yeah, hopefully we find some plants, and hopefully I can show you some interesting stuff. Because the interesting thing about Windlingerii is that when you start in Panama City, the further west you go, the wider the clones get. Wide and short. The further west you go, as you hit Costa Rica, that's when the clones start getting longer and longer. Far west Costa Rica, or far west Panama, like almost near Volcan, that's where we found the longest Windlingerii I've ever seen. It had leaves that were like 5 feet long. It was phenomenal, and I just like cried. But then as you go into Costa Rica and then higher up, you know, towards the Caribbean coast, that's where you start finding plants that are massive. I have some friends that have given me accounts saying that they've found plants that are leaves that are 5 or 6 feet long, huge, massive plants, and you know, I mean, what else needs to be said? That's ridiculous. 6 foot leaves, get out of here. I had one friend tell me that he saw one growing on a telephone pole with 6 foot leaves. I don't know. That's like the craziest thing I've ever heard, ever, from anyone ever. I'm hoping that that's the kind of stuff that I can show you guys, you know? So stay tuned, subscribe, go ahead and start doing that.